Hey everybody, and welcome to WolfCast. This is the Vassals of Kingsgrave episode to discuss all things House of the Dragon. And we have a couple of editions of this. We have Krakencast, that is from the Asia Pacific region. We have Dragoncast from the Americas. But flying the mighty sword of House Stark, we have WolfCast from Europe. My name's Bina007, and I will be your host today. And I'm going to introduce you first to Sir Patrick the Tall, who's going to explain to you what on earth Vassals of Kingsgrave is and why we are Wolfcast and the mighty history of the wolves. Over to you, Patrick.
Yeah. Okay. So House of the Dragons is sort of like a spin-off to a little series called Song of Ice and Fire or a Game of Thrones. Well, in the same fashion, we also have the Vassals of Kingsgrave, which originally came from oh my god. Okay, I'm blanked. Come on, help me, guys.
Podcast of Ice and Fire.
Oh yeah, okay, cut that out.
Shocking lack of knowledge.
Yes,
I know, right?
which is also a theme from us. We are an offshoot of Podcast of Ice and Fire, which are four, sometimes five, very, very distinguished people who reread the books and are very much into the books of Songs of Ice and Fire. A lot of us got into that through the forums, and at some point, they decided to have a podcast for all us fans as well, so we could give our 2 cents to all the things that happened. And when Game of Thrones came to the screens, we decided to do our own podcast. And yeah, as you said, we divided into different regions, and the best one, of course, is the WolfCast. Ow.
We should explain that we're a community-hosted podcast, which is why we have podcasters from all over the world. So people from the west coast of the US through to Australia, everyone in between, age ranges from teenagers up to 40s, 50s. We're very hopefully welcoming. So if any of you are listening and have things to say, please hop onto our Discord server. You can find the link at vokpodcast.wordpress.com. You can find it on our Twitch channel. Search for VOK Podcast and you should come across it. And we'll be happy to see you to chat all things House of the Dragon. So to also just get rid of a bit of housekeeping, in this podcast, we will potentially ruin anything from House of the Dragon. We'll potentially ruin anything from the published works of George R.R. Martin, but we're not actually going to ruin anything from Game of Thrones, so anything that was after the books ended, because one of our good friends who's on this podcast has not completed it, and because I think Dragoncast are going to talk about GOT. I'm not sure it's going to be that relevant anyway, but they're going to talk about it. We'll have WolfCast as the place where people who don't want to be ruined for the end of GOT to come and feel safe and lovely. So with that, let me introduce our fellow podcasters in no particular order. Well, maybe as we were just talking about Nymeria, let's start with Nymeria.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Mary and Nymeria on our very own Discord. And yes, I am one of those people who hasn't watched the end of Game of Thrones because I don't want my first idea of what's going to happen to be the show. So thank you for making an effort to keep it spoiler-free here. Yay!
It's a very understandable and admirable position that I also held for many years, and then finally gave up the ghost when I went on Iceland on a holiday, and my best friend made me just watch it all because it was too annoying. We also have coming back to the podcast after quite a hiatus, but an OG Vocker from the single digit Vox, Teddard.
Hello. Quentin's alive.
You have to say it properly though.
Quentin's alive!
There you go. I love this podcast so much. David, over to you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm David HHH on the Discord, and I don't know if the forums are sort of still there, but yeah.
Over to you, Bing.
Hey, I'm Bing, Shoeshiner once upon a time, when I was still active in the forums. I believe my very first of these was with the WolfCast, so I still claim to be part of the WolfCast, even though I've wandered into the other ones as well.
Okay, over to Jock.
I am Jock, totally not creepy on the forums.
Hannah.
Hey,
Yeah.
it's Hannah. Winged Shadow on Discord, Shadowbaby on WordPress. I just wanted to correct David when he introduced himself, though. Since this is WolfCast, you have to say, your name is David H.
Oh yes, right.
To do everything proper here.
And you do have to say Aru. I mean, I have to say that the moment in the first episode where Matt Smith is like whipping up the city watch and they all start Aruing just gave me a very broad smile on my face. Right, let's start off by going around the table and giving your lemon cake ratings out of 5 for this first episode. So short, snappy, 1 minute initial impressions, and then we'll get into the meat of the episode. So starting with Bing.
I'll give it a 3.5. By all objective notions, it probably should be higher, something like a 4, 4.5. I just really get squished out by any surgeries, and the main big thing in this episode is essentially anyways, no.
Spoilers.
Fair enough. David, HHH, how about you?
I'll give it a 4.25. Like, I liked it. It certainly is a visual upgrade from Game of Thrones. They've definitely, the CGI is coming along nicely and it looks gorgeous and it's very immersive in this world very quickly, which I liked. I feel like people who haven't watched Game of Thrones can probably watch this and start to figure out what's going on, I hope. And, obviously there wasn't a lot of action or whatever, but I feel like it was a good setup. It did what it needed to do. And definitely it felt so good to be back. And it feels good for us to be back. So
Jock, how about you?
I think I'll give it a 3 out of 5. Something I really did appreciate was the theme of how society controls women's bodies in the first episode. I think that's quite relevant topic at the moment, unfortunately.
On the money, as ever.
Right.
Mary, what are your initial impressions?
I would give it a 4. I really enjoyed it. I'm not too big on the violence and C-section and stuff. Apart from that, it was really well done, and it's good to be in a fantasy show again. So yay!
Yay, Eddie, how about you?
About 3.5 out of 5. Squicked out a bit. I don't think the tawny scene should have been quite so bloody because they're all the upper class and they wouldn't go around killing each other. I think.
So Targaryen upper class.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, he was beating up Baratheons and stuff, and one guy didn't have a
Right.
face.
Not just
Yeah.
one guy,
Right.
several guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, several guys. Yeah,
Fair enough. Patrick, over to you.
yeah.
Well, it was different. I think I will give it a 3 out of 5. And actually,
Ooh.
yes, everything different is what takes it down. I think actually they did a very good job in everything that was in the books, that they brought it in very faithfully. But whenever they had to flourish, the flourish fell flat.
Okay.
So a 3 out of 5. I'm happy to see that they did some things really, really well, but I'm also unhappy about other things.
How about Hannah?
I'll give it a 3.5. I'm not altogether gone on it yet. The one thing I noticed right away and appreciated deeply was the Iron Throne was a lot more accurate to what's in the
Yes.
world book than in the main series.
Yeah, it looks dangerous.
It was almost exactly right, and I really appreciated that change.
Welcome, Elle. And what is your lemon cake rating out of 5? Your just quick initial impressions of this new series.
I enjoyed it, but I am going to stick steadfastly at a 4. Excellent, stellar, but there were a few concerns. I think it was actually brought up in the room about the prophecy. That kind of hit me upside the head a little bit. So there were some reservations there. But for the most part, pretty dang good. I thought they overall stuck the landing.
Yeah, and I think when you read the comments on our Discord chat and in the community, it does feel that where people are loving the CGI, they're loving the setting and being back in this world. Where they do have reservations, it is about maybe the retconning of the prophecy and where they've gone a bit off piece. I personally would give this a solid 4.5 out of 5. I cannot, for the life of me, remember Fire and Blood. I was never that into Targaryens. So I'm watching this almost as a Game of Thrones viewer who'd never read the books, just on its own terms. And I went back and watched season 1 of Game of Thrones, and it's so amazing, like how many different like stories they have to weave into that episode. Whereas this is just a very simple episode, right? And I think I just loved it. I just loved being in the world. I loved seeing a proper tourney at big scale, not what we had in Game of Thrones. And I'm willing to go with it. I'm willing to go with the retconning and so forth and judge it maybe at the end of the season if I've seen it go really off-piste. So far for me, really good. I mean, I'm just very happy to be in this world. So it feels like we're kind of cautiously optimistic, if I would summarize the group. I think what would be quite cool is if maybe we discuss the production values of it, how it looks, how it feels to watch, how they put together the big scenes, then talk a bit about the actors and the characters and whether they feel true to life, and finally talk about the plot, how much they decided to take in over this episode, and where we start to see divergences and where they might be troubling. Does that sound like a plan to everybody?
Yep.
Cool. So who wants to take it away on production values? All I would say is I watched it on a massive TV and it looked in 4K. It looked flipping amazing. I just love. I think the CGI has come on great. The kind of the pan shots as the dragons flying over King's Landing. It felt like I was in a world, and a thriving, rich world, and I just loved being immersed in it. But how about you guys? Like the costumes, the design. How did it feel to you all?
It really helped that it's all in Dolby Atmos and Dolby Vision. So all the costumes, they pop and everything, and they made the dragons different colors so that they also, play off of that extra color depth. So that's good. That's really good. I've upgraded my own TV system recently, so I have full Dolby Atmos, and that's nice when actually some series support it. So for that piece, I'm very happy. And I think overall, I didn't. If they went down on budget on costumes, I didn't notice it. That I was looking really closely to see is there any visual downgrades from the costumes, and I couldn't see any. So I'm very happy about that. I really enjoy the costumes in Game of Thrones. So I'm happy.
Yeah, and none of that dodgy wiggage that we had in early episodes, right? Like they just hit the ground running. Good.
Clearly, Game of Thrones was the, flagship show on HBO, and they're treating this that way. Like, they certainly are giving it the money that they didn't the first season of Game of Thrones, but they did by the last season. So it looks really good. And if anything, the CGI has, evolved even better, and everything. I mean, every costume, there's just everyone's different. There's so many little details all over that are amazing. It'll be interesting to see if that continues, given, with the whole merger and with the company trying to cut the budget and everything. It'll be interesting to see if next season that continues. I hope, but
I think it'll just depend on the ratings, won't it?
Right.
How did you all feel, speaking of production? I mean, Game of Thrones had a pretty iconic theme tune and opening credits.
Yep.
How did you feel about the opening theme and credits of this one?
I was disappointed, personally.
I'm wondering if next week we'll get it. It'll be back to normal.
Yeah, next week we'll have the opener.
Interestingly, though, that they did use the theme for the closing credits.
They did slip the theme in under the radar a few times.
I was about to say,
Right.
just so that we're sure we're watching the right show, right?
Right.
Did they also put a few notes from Reigns of Castamere in at some point?
I noticed that too.
Yeah, so they've just trying all the as hard as they can, just remind us this is the dragons and things. It's the same thing, from the other time.
Don't freak out because there's no Starks and people from the north. Yeah.
So, of course, I was looking for a grand opening credits like all of you guys, everyone else. But what really hit me was it was like a bronzy golden dragon. And I was like, well, isn't Aegon II, because of Sunfire, isn't his sigil a golden dragon? What are they doing? Like my head just went immediately to that. And I mean, obviously it may not be nothing and I'm just kind of getting ahead of myself, but immediately I went to that. Like, why are they showing a gold dragon?
I love it. We're in the nerdery already. Let's just take a pause and welcome. We have some new joiners. So welcome, Zander. Do you want to introduce yourself to the new listeners?
Hi, it's me. I'm late.
Zander. Excellent. Okay. Zander, what's your lemon cake rating out of 5 for this episode and why? Very brief.
I'm gonna go 4 out of 5 because I didn't watch the Game of Thrones show all the way, but this feels like a song of ice and fire. This feels right.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so it feels like basically we all love the production design. We'll pass judgment on how they use the opening theme next week, and we'll stay tuned to whether we like or don't like what they're doing with the dragons. In general, though, I would say dragons are cool, and there's a lot of them, so that is pretty cool. On to the cast and the actors, actresses. Do you guys have any favourites so far? Any people who you thought really looked like how they were in the books, or anyone that you thought, oh, I don't like that bit of casting, that's just not working for me? Elle, do you want to go first?
Sorry.
I liked Viserys, surprisingly. The stills I was kind of underwhelmed, but I actually end up really liking him. And just on top of the whole like costuming and setting, everyone's wigs looks a million times better than Game of Thrones.
Yep.
The Targaryen wigs, I don't know who they went to go see about the wigs, but I'm very, very relieved because a huge improvement from Game of Thrones.
I agree.
Also, you can tell we're in a very different time period just with the fashion. So I appreciated that. And I absolutely loved the Godswood. I was like, can we just stay here for the rest of that episode? This is gorgeous.
Yeah, the heart tree, that sort of pan through the leaves down was really stunning. Just took my breath away.
Really beautiful. And it felt huge like it should. Whereas I think we see it one time in the main series and it was very narrow. And so I really appreciated how grandiose that Godswood is in the Red Keep, as it should be. And then as far as casting goes, I'm still struggling with seeing the Doctor in there.
Definitely.
I like it's like the poor Harry Potter kids are always going to be the Harry Potter kids, and he's kind of that for me.
But to me, he's Prince Philip in The Crown. So.
Well, and speaking of The Crown, it looks like they're going to do like an age up on Rhaenyra and Alicent Hightower coming this season, I think. So that'll be interesting when they get recast.
Gosh. Patrick, you wanted to speak about Otto Hightower and the casting of him.
I'm sorry, I don't like it. He does not look lordly and nothing, and I really like the actor, but I just don't like him in this role. That's simply just it's a dissonance between what I imagined. I imagined someone who's actually looks like he has had money for the whole of his life, and not someone
who's had money for their whole life look like? Patrick,
slightly more plump and better teeth, I guess. I'm sorry, but that's.
No, I disagree, Patrick. I think it's a juxtaposition of here's a person with wealth and extreme privilege, but it's the office that just takes the years off you and makes you lose weight from all the stress. Like, even if you're serving a decent king, it's still a very high stress job. So I kind of liked that he looked a little disheveled and sort of hadn't seen his bed in a while in most of the scenes.
Zander, you also don't like Otto Hightower. Can you put your finger on why, or is it just a vague, this isn't working for me?
So it was weird when I was watching the episode. As soon as the episode started, I was like, I forgot everything that happened.
Me too.
So it was kind of like, as I'm watching and learning these characters again, I'm like, all right, who's this? Who's that? Who's that? Because I love Viserys, man. He's playing that so well. But yeah, I don't know if it's like because we never really got Hightowers on the page or anything, so we don't really have like a distinction to them like we would Baratheons or Starks or Targaryens or something. So I think it is just off-putting, like trying to figure out what the Hightower thing is.
Yeah. Jock, do you want to speak to Alicent Hightower?
I'm not really familiar with the actress. In terms of a sort of subjective view, I'm not really knowledgeable in terms of like acting from like an objective framework, but in terms of like the subjective, like the way she expressed feelings and the situations that she was in, I felt was really good.
Yeah, and I think they really sold the friendship between these two girls that's going to go so horribly wrong. And you see that she's just a girl, and that the idea that she's going to then, get married off to Viserys is kind of disgusting. But Hannah, Valyrian, speak to us.
So one thing that struck me right away is when Rhaenyra starts speaking in Old Valyrian, and then the episode, it was the accent and everything was so much more thick. And I don't know if they did this on purpose or not, but if they did, it's brilliant, because when we are hearing it spoken in GOT, it would naturally be even more diluted after 100 years. And there's only so many people that speak it. And so I noticed that right away, how thick the accent was and how hard she hits some of the syllables and things. And I just love that. So I'm hoping it was a conscious choice and not just somebody taking their own license. Like, I would hope that stays through the series when we're hearing it.
I think that's a really acute point about how accents and particularity will get diluted over the years.
I'm just going to say that one of my theories has now been confirmed, that they do use Valyrian as a court language. Equal measures as Westerosi. So this actually confirms that it would have been it would be common tongue to speak to other Targaryens with that tongue, and I like that. I like that because it like reflects how it was historically also in courts throughout Europe, that you would have a court language which would be different from the common language.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Speaking of accents, more parochially, did any of you notice that the young actress, who I thought was really impressive otherwise, who plays Rhaenys, so she's actually Australian in real life, and Millie Alcock, and I don't know if it's because I knew that, but I felt that there were certain moments in the first episode where I could feel her Australian accent leaking through, and it really took me out of the episode. And that's the only kind of acting choice that I just like. I can see why they cast her, because she really looks like a younger version of the actress who's going to play the older version. I just felt the Australian accent was leaking through. Did anyone else notice that, or is that just me being uber picky?
I think I noticed it, but I didn't want to, because Nikolai Coster-Waldau and Peter Dinklage both had like accents seeping through in their performances. So yeah.
Fair enough. We've got form on this, I suppose, so it doesn't really matter. Anything else on any of their performances?
Everyone knows they wore those hats with the corks hanging off in Valyria.
Dear. I don't know how to follow up on that. But
not on acting, but I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, sorry. I think one. I don't know if this is going to be a problem this series is going to have going forward. I think what stands out in comparison between the cast of this show versus Game of Thrones, the first episode, there's not that sort of huge standout performances, right? I mean,
do you not think Matt Smith as Daemon is? I mean, he's got a bit of that sort of.
He has a little bit, I guess, but it's not like Peter Dinklage, right? It's not like instantly iconic as Peter Dinklage, or even somebody like, I don't know, the Hound. Or the physics striking Arya, something like that, right? Game of Thrones sort of in the first episode of Game of Thrones, they sort of set in stone this iconic characters almost instantly, and it's unfair.
I would argue, as someone who's literally just 2 days ago watched all of season 1, that actually in episode 1 they didn't, because they had so many people to introduce. You saw about a sentence of Arya and about a sentence of
but
Dinklage.
They established those characters very well with just these few sentences. I think, again, going back to Game of Thrones, I think it's a little bit different now, because we sort of already become too familiar with those characters. But as sort of introduction, especially to an audience, if we're talking about an audience who's not familiar with this, especially all of these characters, I'm not sure. Other than maybe Matt Smith and definitely, I think Viserys is the one that does sort of stand out. That's the character that really sort of stood out in going.
Yeah, that's probably a fair point.
Otherwise, I don't know Corlys Velaryon from this episode. I don't really. You get a little bit of Otto Hightower, but it's maybe a little bit too subtle.
Mm.
The
I think
young,
we'll find out in due
yeah,
course. I think it's probably a
sure.
bit yeah. I think it's probably worth sort of waiting and seeing how it goes. Should we talk a bit about how much of the sort of explicit stuff there is, Jock? You wanted to make the point about Matt Smith. Do you want to make that point?
In the first episode, it doesn't seem like too much, but in terms of post-production, Matt Smith has gone on record saying he's here to do a bit too much in terms of sex scenes. So I don't know what's
Oh,
going to.
really? Yeah.
But
I mean, it's interesting though, because actually what struck me from that first episode was even when there were sex scenes, which there wasn't that much of, it was mostly like sort of like the odd male ass. It wasn't didn't feel as exploitative as early or all of Game of Thrones really. And it was much more violence than it was sexual violence or sex, which felt I was just really thankful for that. So let's see where it goes to.
I thought that already like wasn't like the first few episodes that they had that many whorehouse scenes, but already they're out there
Right.
doing
Right.
the whole thing, the sex position. What bothers you, my prince? Stuff like that, and it's like, come on, dude. I already get flashbacks from Game of Thrones.
Right.
That was one of the things that irked me the most, actually. The scenes in that.
Huh.
I know that they had to do one of them with the Heir of the Day. That was necessary and good that they had it, but apart from that, I wasn't for it.
I wonder if they feel
Was
caught
she-
between two stools, because there's clearly the people who disagreed with it last time, but also presumably they must think a lot of the popularity of the show was because of it last time, and it's HBO, right? So maybe they feel they have to.
Part of that, she becomes a pretty major character, right? The White Worm. That she becomes Damon's mistress
Yep.
of whispers.
Yeah,
Yep.
so they had to introduce her, right?
I mean, if that's supposed to be her.
Yeah.
I don't remember those books. Was Nymeria that big of a character in the books?
Yeah, that's her.
Okay. I know she becomes sort of something important, so it's like a bigger, more important position or something like that, whatever, but I don't remember how important she actually was in the books.
Right. Well, at least
She,
that makes that scene less gratuitous. You know, it felt if you don't know where it's going, it felt pretty gratuitous to me. Like, I mean, I knew, so like, you know what I mean? It's like it feels. If you're a casual viewer, you're probably like, we're getting a gratuitous sex scene here. Great, it's Game of Thrones.
Well, and overall in this episode, they seem to be really building up Damon and his, motivations and archness a lot. So,
oh yeah, he's clearly the kind of the big guy of all of this.
His helmet at that tourney, that's like almost exactly the helmet that in the world book at the last page Rhaegar is wearing in his battle against Robert.
Oh,
noticed.
okay.
I noticed. Yeah.
You guys are so much more eagle-eyed than me. I'm very much watching this as a sort of very casual, pathetic, sort of normie.
You're not alone, Bina. I'm doing the same.
Yeah, and I'm kind of enjoying it. It's quite liberating not getting like super stressed out about every last thing, I have to say. Anything more on characters you like or dislike at this stage? Maybe it's just too early. First episode in.
Well, I already hate Otto Hightower. Just such a punchable face.
Yeah.
And I hate that I'm already bled because reading it, the story and knowing what's happening. I'm thinking maybe if I didn't, I wouldn't feel that way. But immediately when he comes on screen, I am just angry.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that we already start to sort of sympathize with Damon, right? Or at least think he's fair. No, well, if we keep on seeing this much of him, it's going to be natural that at least if a lot of people will find him as to be the protagonist of the story, along with
I don't feel they set him up that way, though. I don't feel like they set him up that way on this show. I mean, I thought he was definitely the antagonist.
But they did the same with Peter Dinklage, and this is meant for them to be ambiguous. But I just like that a bit about it, because I think that's basically the whole point of Rogues. How the story about the Daemon Targaryen was introduced in Rogues is because we're supposed to think about how when people become the protagonist and how they, even though they don't follow the rules and they're, violent and stuff like that, we tend to end up being invested in those characters, even though they're not actually likable or shouldn't be likable.
I don't know if I'd agree in terms of this episode. I feel like they were definitely setting him up as the antagonist. I mean, for one thing, which I again haven't read the books in a long time, so I don't know if it's a change, but it felt like a change to me that, the entire setup of why he decides to name his daughter as the heir is to stop Daemon. Like it's all in terms of him, as opposed to because I love my daughter and I want her to have the power. It was definitely like this guy's bad, he's trouble. All my advisors saying he can't be king. So like I don't know. I feel like he's definitely being set up to be the rogue in this episode, at least.
But a charming rogue.
Yeah.
Somewhat.
Yeah,
I
that's
don't know.
that's
I
the
don't
point,
know.
right? I think it is not as clear. Like he is very much like we see how violent he is
Right.
and all of that, but he's also very charismatic, right? A lot of people admire him, so I think they are walking a very thin line of not making him too much of an antagonist for now.
And either way, he is, I guarantee, going to be a fan favorite, audience-wise. People are going to love him.
Yeah, I'm sure of that as well.
Westerosi Loki.
Right. There you go.
There you go. That's a good one.
Okay, guys, shall we move on to the plot and what was covered? Because it felt like a lot of ground was covered in this first episode, but in a pleasing way, maybe for me anyway.
One thing,
So
one last
Okay.
character thing I wanted to say, just before I forget, in terms of characters that stood out. I remember when I watched this with sorry, I watched this with Michal and Kevin last night in New York, and both Michal and I were drawn out by how hot Sir Kristen Cole was. Like it was just a moment of like we're like wow, like normally you expect that on Game of Thrones, but it was just this one we were all like ooh.
Yeah, exactly.
He's
Definitely.
apparently Dornish.
That tripped me out too. Like Dornish?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I look. It took me about 3 looks, and I thought, yeah, he could be a bit Dornish.
Okay, folks, so the plot summary for episode 1, and we can do it in chunks and then talk about how we feel about it. So let's do the prologue. So we've opened with old King Jaehaerys Targaryen and his sons, Princes Aemon and Balon, being dead. So the succession has to be decided between 2 grandchildren. The first candidate being a woman, Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, who's married to Lord Corlys Velaryon. And obviously the person who wins is the boy, Prince Viserys Targaryen, who is actually younger than her, but is a boy and is married to Lady Aemma Arryn. So there you go. That's basically the sort of the prologue. We then move into 9 years later into basically another succession crisis, where we have Viserys being married to Aemma, failing to have male children. She's currently pregnant. He's holding a big tourney. He expects imminently to announce good news. He's forced to make a decision between her and the child. Ultimately, both die anyway. And then he realizes that rather than trying for a male heir, he should recognize that his daughter is actually the one who has the ambition, and he should have spent more time with her, training her up to be his heir. So that's kind of like the succession plan. Meanwhile, in the wings, you've got the heir that maybe feels he should have been the crown prince, Daemon Targaryen, who is back in town when he shouldn't be, stirring up shit with the City Watch, fighting in a tourney, causing all manner of havoc, and generally being seen as a rebel and a rogue. So Viserys basically banishes him at the end of the episode, and decides to get everyone to swear allegiance to his daughter, but clearly is setting up problems for the future. Anything big I missed there? How did you guys feel about the amount of substance they covered in this episode and the choice of starting? I mean, the story goes back and it goes forward, right? So that the decision to start this series at this point is quite not a bold one, but it's a choice. There are many other choices. And the decision to sort of tell this particular arc is nothing to discuss. And then finally, the decision to give the daughter the motivations that she has in feeling as a sort of spurned female daughter, which isn't quite as strong in the book. So I don't know if you guys want to start with the decision on starting those where they start. Any thoughts on that?
it's very important to have it. So I think it's a good idea to just show quickly. Yes, it's a question about succession, and yes, there was one time it could have happened instead of just having to reference it off screen. I think it was very important that they brought that in. Yeah, I'm happy actually with the choice of that. Yeah.
I would have liked to see a little more of the council. When the show very first started, I thought, okay, cool, we're gonna get that like Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Rings, long ass prologue, you know, and maybe they don't have time for it. It just as a personal thing, I would have liked to see a little bit more of that, a little more setup. But maybe they'll go back and kind of reference it a little more too, like
we could get
we're
some
getting
flashbacks.
it from
You never know.
now.
Yeah. Anyone not like the starting point? Kind of made sense to me. I also thought that the arc in the episode made sense to me. The only bit that I found, it didn't feel too rushed. Did anyone find it rushed? Like, I don't know.
No, it was good. I think the pacing was pretty good.
Nope.
Yeah. The only bit I found a bit weird, apart from the retconning of prophecy, and we will get there, is which of you finds it weird, the sort of the motivations around the daughter? Because from what I remember of the books, it didn't feel like it was this whole gender thing. But David, do you want to speak to that, or
Yeah, I mean,
anyone else?
I definitely feel like they're changing a lot of the not the actual facts, but like the opinions and motivations here. You know, like I said, I think changing Daemon into being the reason for the change for the appointment, you know, of her, and her being, you know, she, like in the books, she's the realm's delight and everyone loves her, and so it almost makes sense that she would be the heir. But here it's definitely like they're going for, you know, the gender politics of it, which for these days that we live in might be better for the audience. We'll see, but it's definitely a change, and we'll see how that and if and how that domino effect affects the rest of the show.
And that's one reason why I did not give it all 5. I feel like it sullied Rhaenyra. Like, yes, she was the realm's delight. There really wasn't a whole lot of, you know, gender Hufflepuff about it. And I just felt like, you know, the audience is coming in with this, you know, she's got this, it's all because I was a girl, and, you know, I have this grudge just because I'm a girl, as opposed to this was kind of already settled, guys, and then these intervening factors completely turned it on its head. So
Why was sorry, I'm just asking to support you. Why was Lionel Strong the one who's most against the idea?
yeah, there was another thing, but he was so why is he so vocal? I don't know. You know, I don't know why that stuck out like that.
Also, he didn't look like a fighter. He didn't look like Lionel Strong as he was described in the book.
No, he didn't.
But yeah. So not my Lionel Strong.
I feel like it kind of put a pall on her that, for good or for bad, I mean, you know, like maybe this is a good thing, and they kind of want to drive it home in these kind of times, and kind of like, hey, this patriarchy thing is not great because look what happens. But I don't know. I don't feel quite right about it.
Yeah, I think it gives her something specific to latch on and know about her personality that maybe wasn't necessary, and is indeed not quite as maybe pure as it could have been with her just being the natural and the natural heir, the one we feel is should be the heir.
It kind of gives her this old, like, Cersei vibe with, you know, it's just because I'm a girl, and, you know, and like you said, this was supposed to happen. It was nice and settled law. You know, this is not the reason why she's fighting so hard. She's fighting so hard. She's going to fight so hard because this was right. Like, she was wronged, essentially, not because she was a woman, but because she was literally, you know, usurped.
I mean, I would think that it is also because she was a woman, but that is going to come up anyway.
Yeah,
like, it is going to be an issue in a plot point in the in the series, right, it is going to be about how a woman cannot be queen on the Iron Throne. So it doesn't feel necessary to me to make it a point for her whole reason for fighting and for her whole development, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
I was okay with it personally, but I like it.
It also seemed like she didn't want to be king or ruler, or she at least like was okay with not being it.
I don't think that she was okay with it. I think she was just sort of at one point resigned.
My point is, book Rhaenyra would not have been. She would have been like, no, seriously, I am the only one. There's no idea. She would be. She has the same idea that Daemon has. That's why they're so compatible.
So again, I'm very, very fuzzy, and maybe this is to my benefit that I'm really fuzzy on these books, and I really don't care as much about these books as maybe some of you guys do. Whatever, I don't even remember what Alan Strong was supposed to look like in the books. I'll be honest, but so to this point, do the books actually go into Rhaenyra's childhood as much as they do in the show in the first episode? And has she always been like this in the books? Because this is something that she could very much grow into. That sort of privileged position.
Yeah, but she's a grown adult. She looks adult. There's a mother version, like one who's believable as a mother, which she is not, of course. But she is. Well, she does not look 13 or 14 or whatever.
I think those characters never look 13, 14, but she's supposed to be young. And I could be wrong. Yeah, she's supposed to be young in this episode, right?
Okay, but my point is, if she were brought up with the idea of her being the natural heir, she would act a different way. But also, I was just putting it down now because it doesn't matter. We'll see what happens. I just also want to apologize right away for saying that a niece and his uncle and her uncle are compatible. It's really creepy, I know, but it's sadly to say it's part of the story.
It kind of feels like on this episode, if no other, we should spend a few minutes talking about Emma Arryn and the choice to maybe age her up in the casting, and just in general her role in this story as this poor sort of woman whose only kind of job is to be a broodmare, and maybe even just more trivially the pronunciation of her name. So who wants to have at it on Emma?
Emma,
right?
As in Aemon and Damon. And that's all I got.
I feel like there's a trend throughout George R. R. Martin's work that shows what is generally considered underage marriages to be not just bad as in an indicator of the people involved as being bad, but as in bad from a sociological view. In this view, like Emma giving birth at 15 after multiple miscarriages is obviously seen as a travesty and is generally used as an indicator that Viserys is not a good person, but also it causes pretty much the downfall of the Targaryens. And likewise, like Tyrion replaced her when he was 13, Jaime and Cersei when they were young, and various other examples throughout the whole thing, such as Daenerys and Khal Drogo being the most prominent one. And I feel like by aging her up, it loses a lot of that storytelling.
How far are they caught between a rock and a hard place in that? Because when they don't age them up, we're like, oh, it's so creepy. Oh, Dinklage is creeping on Sansa. And then when they do age them up, we're like, oh, but that was the point that George R. R. Martin was trying to make about how exploited young girls and young women were. So I totally take your point, Jock, and I kind of agree with it. But I just sort of feel, my word, if you were the producer, it's a very, very tricky place to be.
Right.
I'd definitely go for less icky.
I don't remember. For everyone who read Fire and Blood, or at any point, did we have a physical description of Aemma?
I don't think so, but I believe there's a picture of her in the World Book. There's also a picture of Rhaenyra, and both of them are ungodly, unrealistically beautiful. They look like gods.
Okay, I just she had Targaryen hair, and I couldn't remember the ancestry if she was maybe half Targ, half Aaron, and just came out with platinum hair. And I didn't get a chance to go and research.
Yeah, she's half Targaryen.
Okay,
Yeah.
She's Daela Targaryen's daughter.
Got
With,
Is Rhaenyra really 8 when Emma dies, Mary?
Well, unless I'm very bad at math, I think so. She's supposedly born in 87. Emma dies in 105.
Rhaenyra is born in 97.
Yeah, and Emma Arryn, her mom dies by the end of 105. So,
gosh, it kind of makes it
mean,
more absurd in the books that people are being asked to swear fealty to her, because ultimately,
yeah.
in the TV show, it's kind of like, why do they need to like screw her over and support a guy? Because actually, she's young, but she's capable. But if it's 8, then you get it more, because then it's not even someone even capable of ruling by virtue of age, let alone by virtue of sex.
I'm guessing that there's something to be said about Viserys naming her. I think probably they didn't have to name an heir in such a clear way before, so they didn't have any traditional ceremony where everyone swears fealty, whereas here he wants to make a point, so he has that. I mean, in any case, she's definitely older in the series, but I think the point about the fact that maybe the way she's portrayed now in the series isn't so far off from the book, because we don't really see her that young in the book stands. Like she could grow into feeling entitled and being, I'm the heir, I've always been the heir, because if you've been heir since you were 8, that's kind of like how you're gonna feel.
I wonder if Viserys, like in the books later on, when he gets challenged by the Greens or the High Tires, whatever, about changing the succession, and a lot of times he was just like very how adamant he was in the books. I wonder if they're gonna kind of follow that in the show.
I have to imagine they would. I mean, so far we've seen a lot of there's a few verbatim quotes from the World Book when Daemon says, "In the Vale, men fuck sheep because the sheep are prettier than their women." That's a direct
right.
So good.
Yeah,
Love
very
that.
happy about that one.
The bronze bitch, So I hope they're drawing off the source material a lot more heavily than the other people who shall not be named were, by the when they ran out of source material, they were just like, fuck it, we'll do whatever we want. You have all this source material, just stick to it, do the thing.
I don't think the source material is very good. I feel like they should feel free to. This is the weird thing in comparison with Game of Thrones and Song of Ice and Fire. Song of Ice and Fire is a very good source material. It's just unfortunately doesn't have an end. Doesn't have an ending, so they have to make shit up. Okay, but they started deviating much earlier, and when they deviate, it tend to go really, really bad. It pales significantly in comparison to the original work. In this case, Fire and Blood's not a very good book. In my purely subjective opinion.
Okay.
And I feel like they should go way off as much fun as they want with this as they can. I'm sorry, I think I made someone drop off the call even, but
yes,
I completely agree. Who wants to be the opposing view? And we should end on that final opposing view, because I'm with Bing on this one. I'm like, writers, have at it. You clearly have passion for this material. You respect this world. You go for it. Who is on the opposing side of that argument?
I don't think I'm on the opposing side, but I wanted to make a point about the point of views.
Yeah, go for it.
Point of views in Game of Thrones and Fire and Blood are vastly different, because Fire and Blood was supposed to be second-hand knowledge from a maester. I was trying to listen to the audiobook. It's so fucking boring for the first bit.
Yes.
And Game of Thrones is all first person from various points of view, so you get all the context.
So I would say that's what basically be my point, but also to say that if you want to write within genre, I think it does it very well. That you don't enjoy those kind of books, that's just your problem, actually.
Okay.
There you go.
I mean, read real
Throne,
history
yeah.
too much to actually enjoy fake history as much.
Oh,
But,
okay, yeah. So you're yeah.
but the point is, this is not so much about genre material, genre whatever. You're trying to translate a book into a TV drama. You can't translate 1-to-1 boring maesters speaking, doing a chronicle-esque
Of course
history
not.
into drama, right?
Of course not, Bane.
There's already from the starting point you cannot stick 1-to-1, and
No,
the writing has to change significantly already from that, and characterization in that case has to change. And when that's the case, you have of course you use the book as a reference, but you can get a lot more creative because the characters, frankly, as they're written, and maybe that's again for sure whatever genre, whatever that's the way intended, but the characters as written in those books are extremely boring.
I would say that for Game of Thrones, you would also have a difference. You have to do it differently because you don't have the actual inner thoughts of the characters running through like Blade Runner or whatever. You don't have that going through there. So you can't do this. You can't do the same thing there either. It has to change, and that I think that's makes basically that this discussion
Game of
mute.
Thrones did change that. I feel like Game of Thrones did a very good job of changing that up until season 5-6, in which things went off the rails.
I'm just saying the one way they went around that whole inner thought in a monologue was to have sex position, having people have sex and talking about their stuff. So I'm saying that they changed a lot. They're in the original series, and naturally you cannot have a maester sit there. That's a whole different kind of show. But being faithful to the lines that different characters are quoted to say, I think that's important. And I want to say that they did it very well.
I get where Bing is coming from as far as like it's a textbook and who wants to sit and read a textbook, basically. I think in the world book, because it's a lot more concise, so you get all the same beats as Fire and Blood, but it's not as dense, right? It's just the highlights. Sure, there's a lot from like Maester Gladwin and all these maesters weighing in, but you go a little off the rails when you start adding Mushroom and like like relying heavily on his accounts, and it gets a little more spicy. So I think if they amalgamize certain things or augment them, I don't have a problem with that. I'm saying you have these major plot points. There's plenty of material to deal with. You don't need to add in other nonsense and characters that never existed and never happened. That's what I'm hoping doesn't occur in this series.
I agree.
I agree with that. That's fine.
Same. I agree with that as well. I just think like whether or not we think Fire and Blood is a good book or an entertaining book to read, it's just that like the dance part is long in the book, but it is still quite short compared to 6 books or 5 books of A Song of Ice and Fire. So there's bound to be missing ingredients there as to our characters' motivations and personalities, right? It's just it's not as detailed as A Song of Ice and Fire was. So I think there's a little bit more room for new things to appear in the show, and I'm fine with that.
The biggest thing is that this has an ending. It has a point A and a point B to get to. Now, that doesn't have to be a straight line
Haunting us,
and
stop
make it
taunting
boring.
us. Stop rubbing it in. My word.
But do you know what I mean? It's like this
one's
has
got an ending.
this one and I find myself a little more invested in, like, when I first read the World Book, I read it twice, like back to back, because it was something concrete. I don't know, it just was a relief from still guessing and theorizing. And the only real mystery left in the World Book is like Summerhall, you know? I just think, again, like if you're doing a show based on source material, you should stick to it as closely as humanly possible. Now, I understand like contracts and time, and it's a business that you're running, so there are other considerations in production, but like piss poor planning on the part of production does not constitute an emergency on my part as a consumer of that product. So have a solid plan, hit those highlights, and just stick to it. you can move pieces around the board and you can splash it with a little flair, but stick to the source material. You know what I mean?
The play has already been written.
Is that a happy note upon which to end? It feels like we've come to a happy ending. Maybe I should rephrase that so it's less lewd. We've come to a copacetic end to this podcast. Does anyone else have anything burning they want to say on this topic or any other topics?
Prophecy.
Prophecy.
We still haven't talked. That's the one. We gotta have that.
Note.
We gotta end on a nerdy note.
So that was my main cringe moment in the whole episode. I knew that she would, the character that is important. I don't remember her name. The prostitute who says, "What's the problem, my prince?" I knew that was gonna happen, but this prophecy, having him standing there saying, "It's a secret. That's why no one has ever talked about it before." That was so bad, and I don't mind it being referenced, but it's just like it's so obvious that it was the first episode. They needed to make sure that everyone, even the stupid people, although there are no stupid people listening to this podcast, of course, knew that this was related to Game of Thrones, and it irked me.
In defense, this is an incredibly valuable piece of intellectual property for a series that ended a while ago, and this property does not have that much to do with that property. Do not begrudge them a little bit of trying to link one to the other and retain an audience. I mean, isn't that kind of the price we pay? Like, we look at this beautiful thing, we're praising the CGI, we're praising the costumes, these amazing actors, the amount of money they've lavished on it for a first season. They're paying money that you don't pay normally for a first season. And I kind of feel the price of that commercially is that they're going to try and retcon something to make it look more Game of Thrones prequel. And we just got a deal. Runs away and hide.
No. Sorry.
I was okay with it. I mean, the prophecy was known all this time, right? And that's what Aegon wanted and why he came to Westeros, and that all the kings since then have known that and are trying to build to protect us from the others. But I don't know. I mean, I feel like, for one thing, it's not stated in the books, but then again, it wouldn't be, because how would the maesters who are getting this information know about it? But I mean, I think it's hinted at, and I think a few of us mentioned in the Discord last night that it's hinted that might be the case. So I mean, I think now, since we're not using a third person historical, like, we read this, it's we have first person accounts. They're there in front of us. So I mean, I feel like it makes sense to make it more explicit if in fact that's what George was intending, which I think he was. So if he was, then it makes sense to just say it. And obviously they can know if that was what he was intending, because he can tell them.
Yeah, presumably they just asked him. I mean, he's been on the record saying how much he loves this season, how much he loves this show, how in tune he feels with its authors. I feel if something like this big is happening, you may or may not like it, because, hey, there's shit tons of things George Lucas did with Star Wars that I don't like, even though he's the owner of it. But I actually kind of feel like this is a commercially necessary move, but also one that is probably sanctioned by him. Runs away and hides again.
I agree. It's plausible that he said okay for it. I don't think that he necessarily thought that was the point of Aegon's conquest to begin with. There's no real... I don't see any hints that Aegon wasn't anything but an entitled dragon lord. And having people acting up and saying, "Hey, can you help me with your dragons?" was basically what spurred him on to say, "Well, no, fuck you, I'm going to take the whole thing instead." I don't think Targaryens do anything for the good of the world, honestly. So
yeah, but this is coming down with your and my almost pathological Targaryen hate. Hannah, you had a good point to make about how they could have done this in the prologue in a more elegant way, maybe.
The Ice of Fire thing in Prophecy, it felt a little shoehorned in at the end. So I feel like it's something that either could have waited for the second episode, or, like I was saying, a little more of the council, a little more extended prologue, again, akin to the prologue that we see in Peter Jackson's LOTR Fellowship movie, where the prophecy is stated there. And then when we have that scene in front of the skull of Balerion, it's just sort of, okay, like, now that I've named you my heir, there's something you should know. And we just kind of fade away from that. We don't need the performance. We don't need the dialogue there. We've already had it nodded to, and we're connecting that.
Yeah, I feel that could have worked.
Yeah,
Well,
I don't know.
it didn't happen that way, and so we're stuck
Right.
with it. And on that happy or unhappy note, because let's be honest, you're all going to tune in next week, right? So this is all nonsense,
course.
really.
Of course.
It's a low barrier to entry, isn't it? Not infuriated yet for all of us who
I
survived
know,
Game
right?
of Thrones.
It's
But
different.
it's different, and I feel we're in a good place. Thank you to all my fellow wolves from across the world. This has been an inclusive WolfCast for joining. Shall we give it a final aru for the peoples?
What is dead may never die.
Quentin is alive. Oh, you guys make me happy. You really do.
Right.
It's been a pleasure chatting with you. I hope you guys at home, I hope the listener enjoyed it. If so, tune back in. There'll be another Dragoncast and Wolfcast next week. In the meantime, check us out on the Vassal of Kingsgrave Discord. Search for VOK Podcast, wordpress.com, Twitter. You'll find the link. And we hope to debate and discuss all of this with you soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, man. Thanks for listening.
Bye.